Alright, so Halfus Healer Guide. This fight is the first fight in bot. It's pretty easy heroic. This is like, it's an opening boss. It's going to be one of the first things you attempt on heroic. It's mostly like a healer tank fight. There's not like too much complicated stuff going on. Your DPS are really just going to have to do like priority targeting and some cleave and like dodging fire. For healers, there's a couple things you have to look out for. There's going to be like a lot of bursty raid damage. And there's sort of two different sections of the fight that we'll talk about a little bit later. And this is going to be from disc POB, but I'm going to talk about all the healers. So on pre-pull, you're going to be doing your standard stuff for discipline. That's going to be, you can see me pre-stacking Divine Aegis here with POH. For your other healers, you can always do like pre-hotting as a druid. You can pre-hot a bit with like Riptide. Obviously, you're going to put your Earth Shield up before the pull, stuff like that with your Arsham. You can have a like Healing Rain in the position pre-pull and then drink to full afterwards, stuff like that. For HPAL, you can pre-stack your Mastery Shield like on two tanks that are going to take damage, or even 3 if you have enough time pre-pull. That's capped at like 50k right now with our HP value, so you can get 150k free absorb on all the tanks as an HPAL if you have enough time pre-pull. So that's worth doing. As a Holy Priest, you can have like your Palm, your Renews out, stuff like that. You can also have like a juicy Mastery Hot stacked on the tanks beforehand, although that's like pretty small value on that. So that's pre-pull. So what's going to happen in the fight is there's the first sort of section of the fight where all the ads are active. Usually you're just going to activate like, almost all of them right away. As a healer, you don't really have to care too much about which ads and what. You're just, either way, you're healing a bunch. So not too much to worry about. The Halfus is going to put a debuff up on the tanks that will reduce their healing. So once that stacks up high, you really can't be wasting time like spamming single target heals into the tanks. Although HPALs in this fight, you're going to really want to be just spamming Holy Radiance, but if your tanks are dying in this fight at all, as a Holy Paladin, you should also just, be doing some focused tank killing, and the same goes for the other healers as well. There's a couple things you can do to get rid of the stacks. Well, there's one thing really, which is bop. So you should have your Holy Paladins be, your tanks be calling out for bops from your Holy Pallies or like your red, or a prop pally, something like that, to clear those stacks off. And then obviously your tank's going to have a canceler to just instantly cancel it. So that's pretty useful. The other thing, as a healer, as a Resto Shaman on this fight, you're very strong because you can heal through those stacks completely effectively with Spirit Link. So a tank can go really high in the stacks, be like immune to healing, and you just drop Spirit Link and it tops them. Something to keep an eye out for. The other thing to mention here, again, we're just pre-pulling, stacking up some shields. There's a pull timer. So the other thing is that this boss, every time like anytime one of these ads dies, if like all the whelps die or one of these drakes die, the boss gets a stacking damage buff. So obviously this is like kind of insane for discipline priests. Discipline priests are like really strong in this fight. I think if you look at like the parses, it's like number 1 is a Holy Paladin that's just spamming Divine Light, and then every other healer in the top like 100 is a disc priest pretty much. Just because Atonement is so strong here. But it's also, something to note is that it's good for alert currents on Resto Shaman, so you should always be alert currents on this fight. I mean, you should pretty much be alert currents on almost every fight as Resto Shaman. I don't know why you wouldn't take that. It's just kind of insanely strong. But that's something to mention here, that once one of those ads dies as a Resto Shaman, you can just shoot like 1 or 2 lightning bolts into Halfus and get like your full mana bar back. So you can spam a lot of chain heals on this fight, and you should always be keeping your healing rain up, obviously 100% uptime. So you can see here, we pull, this first couple seconds, there's just tank damage. And you can see here, I'm just keeping those pre-shield stacks, or pre-pull shield stacks up, rather, and just doing a little bit of spot healing. Before the boss gets the damage buff, as a discipline, you should just be basically just like full juice spamming your POH into the raid and, keeping your Rapture up, stuff like that. I wouldn't Atonement in this phase really at all. You can see here, the boss does, the dragon up here does a Scorching Breath. This is like a big burst of raid damage. You can use your AMs, your barriers, stuff like that on this. Although inside of Lust, when you're right on pull, I wouldn't send a raid CD on this, because you just don't need it. If your healers are playing correctly during Lust, you're going to be doing so much HPS that like so much raw HPS that you don't need DR cooldowns really for the raid, my opinion personally. Although this is a good time to use like personals on the tanks as they get higher in those stacks. And you can PS, you can end of sack, stuff like that. And then you're also going to have these little circle fire things on the ground. These you have to dodge. They should have ranged in a little bit of a looser stack, and then melee in a little bit of a looser stack, just so that one of these doesn't cleave every single player in the raid. Although again, when you're in this lust and you're just all the healers are blasting with their full mana bar and everything, you're pretty much not going to die to this. So you don't have to worry too much about avoiding it. You can see here the breath is going to come out, casting, and we just take ticking raid damage. Not too significant. For this part of the fight, pretty much all your healers are just going to be topping the tanks and then spamming their just like big throughput juicy raid heals. Once one of those ads dies, you can see here, I will start to just almost purely atonement heal on the boss. And you can see there, might crit for 70k, and I got an 80k atonement heal off that. Kind of insane, right? So there's some strengths and weaknesses to this. The primary strength is that like basically every time you cast a smite or a holy fire on Halfus when he has, at least one stack of this damage buff on him, you're going to top anyone close to him that's like within atonement range. And atonement range is like, it's decent, right? It's not going to hit like these guys out here, but it will hit everyone like in here. So you're going to instantly top any tank or any like, melee or closer ranged player that takes damage. So that's like really, really strong. And you can kind of just leave the other like maintenance raid healing to your other healers. So I would pretty much from this point on as discipline purely spam atonement and just keep your rapture up on one of the tanks. It's just really, really, really strong. You can see here. Well, I'll show the logs after we go through the VOD. You can see here 90k there, and whenever it crits, it will put up Aegis. So that 90k atonement crit is not just 90k healing, it's also like, 30k absorb or whatever, which is like always going to be, or at least usually not going to be overheal. And you can see here I'm just pressing my shield on the tanks. And again, for your other healers, you're just going to be keeping up healing rain, like on the melee stack. You're going to be using just CS, Holy Shock, Sprinkler spamming for maintenance. Occasionally sending like a Divine Light into one of the tanks if they're dropping. And then you're going to be Radiant spamming onto either like a melee stack or range that are stacked up enough to get splashed when this breath comes out. Holy Priest, you're going to be, POH Renew spreading, Circle of Healing, Palm, doing Holy Priest things. Holy Priest is, you're probably going to be in your AoE chakra most of this fight as Holy Priest. Resto Druid, you're going to be trying to get F-Flow on this stack. And then other than that, you can just Wild Growth. You can even Trank like one of the early breaths and have Trank up again a second time. And you might want to just pop Tree Form kind of on pull just for the first burst on the tanks. You can have triple Life Bloom on all the tanks, and you can regrowthing the tanks up with your clear casting and then spreading your HOTS otherwise. So this is basically just maintenance until these ads are just going to get slowly cleaved. Halfus is going to slowly die, and we're just going to be spamming atonement, spamming atonement, spamming atonement. The next sort of like section of this fight is when you get the first stun thing. And that's really the only time that you're going to be deviating from the atonement plan. As well as just your standard plan for the other healers as well. Just, AoE raid heal the breath, and then otherwise keep the tank stopped. Watch their stacks. You should have their stacks of this healing debuff tracked on your raid frames. You can see it there. I think it's just Fogies that's doing this for me, but if you don't have Fogies, or like, I don't know if there's any other stack people use, but you can track it on Gritter or Voodoo. See here, just pumping. Absolutely pumping with atonement. 100k there. I think also just for gearing tips for this for discipline, I think crit is really good for Halfus, just because like you're gonna be massively overhealing most of the time. So The more often you crit, the more often you're going to put up a really big Aegis with Atonement Healing, which is just almost never going to over. So just the overheal you do while you're just spamming. So once he gets to 50%, we're going to get Roar. You can see there Furious Roar soon. And you can see Foji's tracks, like the ticks of it. So there's a couple things to mention here. As a non-paladin healer, you really can't like do anything personal to avoid this. You can see here one of our paladins bubbled this, and the other one didn't. Ideally, if you have two H-Pals, one's going to bubble the first roar, and one's going to bubble the second roar. And they're just going to be like blasting heals while this is going out to prevent, like, ideally the melee is going to be easily stacked up. The range is going to be kind of spread out to, again, dodge those fireball things that come out, but ideally you're going to be able to keep everyone in the stack from dying with just like a couple radiances. You can even spot heal some people out that are low. The other thing that can prevent this is bop. So if usually the problem is you're gonna have usually bopped your tanks to drop stacks, but if you have an extra one, you can chuck it on a non-pally healer, and they can like immune this stun, and then they can keep blasting heals throughout. So like if you really want to drop healers aggressively on this fight, that's probably going to be part of the strategy. Is just like having those bops scheduled so that you can do a lot of HPS in this part and keep people from dying if they're too low. The other thing to mention is that before this, like just before this goes out, I'll see here if any. So you can see just before this roar goes out, pretty much everybody's topped. What you can do as a discipline priest here, specifically, is if anybody is like below sort of like 80% right before this roar goes out, I would stop atonement healing and I would just pop a power word shield on them, because they're usually not going to get any healing during this phase. So like one power word shield will usually save them this roar, especially if they don't personal. This is like a time when most of your raids should be using personal cooldowns to live this, just because there's not going to be healing going out. It's also a good time to put externals on tanks, stuff like that. But that power word shield can save a life, which is really nice in this phase, especially if you're going to get like 2 or 3 of these. So something to keep in mind. Also, your holy paladins have a kick, and they're going to be in melee anyway. So if they bubble this, they can also get the kick after the roar goes out. If you're a healer without a kick, you don't have to worry about that mechanic at all. Keep blasting. You can see here after we come out of that, I PI myself and I pop my Archangel. And I use a couple of atonements, and then I use my hymn with the last part of this PI to just top the raid. Hymn is, especially when there's like a lot of people damaged like this, it's going to be a little bit of an HPS increase over just atonement spamming, in my opinion, to him there. So I think it's worth doing after one of those roars if the raid is low enough. Back to atonement healing. And all the other healers are just going to go back to their rain, radiance, COH, growth, shenanigans. So you see here, I definitely could have played this roar better. So roar's ready here, and I thought people were low going into it, but they weren't. Just people took some big ticks of damage. You can see here, like before this roar goes out, you will still get these fireballs. So I saw all these people dropping super low. I thought it was just that I failed to shield them before the roar went out, but it was really just that they were standing in one of these circles. So if you see that roar timer going down, you should priority 1 just be moving out of the fireball circles that are already flying towards you, because if you get stunned inside them, you'll probably die. So here I'm back to momenting, pop my Archangel stacks, boss falls over. Not too big a deal that people died there. Boss dies pretty quick once you have all the ads dead. So that's Halfus. Let's look at logs for this. So I believe this is my pull from that we saw there in that VOD. So you can see it's pretty much mostly atonement healing and Aegis. Some power word shield casts. These are pretty much all on the tanks. That one hymn did 31k, which is strong. And then 20 casts of prayer of healing. Again, these are all pretty much Halfus gets the buff. We could have sent a couple more bombs, popping people while that roars out. But again, ideally, you'd be getting bops during that to maximize HPS. If you really want to cheese like parse this, you'd be getting bops. So if you look at just overall, again, it's a couple of Holy Paladins up here that are just like spamming Radiance. They probably have their whole raids like stacked up and they're taking a whole damage from the fire and just healing through it. Everybody else is pretty much Discipline Priests. And then once you get to like 75, there's a couple of Resto Shamans. If you have like your full healing rain down and you're spamming Chain Heal, again, you can top your mana up super quick just with a couple of Lightning Bolts when the boss has that damage debuff. So do not be afraid as a Resto Shaman to spend like all your mana really aggressively. Yeah, it's pretty much just this priest fight here. So the top Resto Druids are doing like 2k. So the top Holy Priest is doing, you know, a little bit less than a Resto Druid. Not a great Holy Priest fight. But I imagine most of these guys are swapping to Discipline for this fight anyway, so such a for atonement. That's Halfus. Again, pretty easy fight, not too much to worry about, just pretty much blast healing, keep an eye on tank stacks, and dodge fire. Especially Discipline, super simple.